What if our universities weren't just, well, degree factories just pumping out graduates? What if they were actual engines for building human civilization? Today, we're diving into a really fascinating explainer of a massive paradigm shift. We're looking at Professor Salah al-Sadek's visionary blueprint, which is known as the Faied cognitive model.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to imagine you're a freshman, right? You're stepping onto campus for the very first time. The Faied model wants you to visualize your education not as some heavy stock of textbooks, but as a mighty river. At the very peak, the source of this river is revelation. That's your sacred source, providing a clear moral compass. Now, this water flows down into the cosmos, which represents the vast valley of scientific discovery and hard data. And here's the magic. When your moral source and that scientific valley unite, they create this incredibly powerful current of stewardship. So you aren't just learning facts, you're literally learning to cultivate the earth. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to quickly map out the true concept of the university and the Faied model, see how science and values actually build the human core, look at some highly practical models for reform, trace out the transformational roadmap, and finally, look at how we measure civilizational impact. All right, moving into part 1, the concept of the university and the Faied model. Before we can even talk about reforming education, we actually have to completely redefine what a university is even supposed to be in our modern era. Think about history for a second. Historically, institutions like Al-Azhar, they weren't just places to sit and memorize facts. No way. They were living, breathing hubs that combined worship, learning, and active community service all into one. And the Faied model, it seeks to completely revive this. It redefines the university as a civilizational space. Basically, it's a place where reason and revelation, technology, and deep values all work perfectly together to build a truly balanced human being capable of real earthly stewardship. So the crucial point is, how do we actually achieve this balance? Well, it happens through something called cognitive integration. Think of it kind of like a giant puzzle. For decades, academia has been deeply fragmented, right? You've got ethics in one building, engineering way over in another. This model completely breaks down those walls. It unifies the sources of knowledge, revelation, the cosmos, and the human mind, so that religion and science, or values and technology, they don't clash anymore. They actually constantly guide each other. And this naturally leads us to civilizational reform. Now, just to be absolutely clear here, this is not about rejecting modernity or retreating to the past. Not at all. It's about civilizational renewal. It's about employing both knowledge and will to solve modern global challenges from a strong position of parity and confidence, rather than just constantly relying on dependency or imported ideas. Which brings us to Section 2, Science, Values, and Building the Human. This brings up a critical, on-the-ground question for us. How does a campus actually shape the human core, and not just the intellect? The Faied model points out a really stark contrast here. On the one hand, you have science without values. We've seen from history, and honestly from reading the news today, that without a moral compass, science just becomes this blind force. Think about artificial intelligence being used for mass surveillance or, biological tech without any ethical limits. It literally becomes a tool for exploitation. But then on the flip side, values without science is just as problematic. That leads to irrational enthusiasm, intellectual stagnation, and an inability to solve real complex problems. You absolutely need both. So what's the ultimate goal of all this? It's to graduate what the model calls the purified human. And this means graduating someone who doesn't just sit back and consume knowledge, but actively produces it. We're talking about someone who possesses beneficial knowledge, is guided by a living, breathing conscience, and exhibits deep civilizational awareness. They demonstrate highly productive competence, maintain personal balance, and foster a sense of open belonging. It's the whole package. But how do we actually graduate this kind of person? Well, we do it by weaving core identity and ethics directly into every single discipline, from tech to the humanities. Because identity isn't taught in a vacuum, right? For instance, the ethical limits of AI shouldn't just be some isolated, optional philosophy class. Those limits should be derived directly from foundational religious and cultural texts and then taught right alongside the engineering code itself. Okay, Section 3, Practical Models for Reform. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how we take these lofty theories and see how they survive contact with a busy, modern university campus. You see, the university is actually uniquely positioned to be the absolute center for this massive reform.
Why? Well, think about it. It has incredible academic independence, a huge concentration of multidisciplinary experts, and thousands of vibrant, energetic youth. Together, they can tackle intellectual, educational, social, economic, and even environmental issues. I mean, we're talking about treating poverty and extremism or creating eco-friendly innovations, all starting right from the lecture halls.
To make this happen, the blueprint proposes 3 incredibly practical models. Number 1 is the Faied Integration College. This is a brand new academic structure that seamlessly blends Sharia and the humanities right along with applied sciences. Number 2 is the Civilizational Research Center, which is a dedicated hub for solving real-world crises using this newly integrated knowledge. And third, we have the Role Model Professor Program. This is an intensive initiative to train faculty to be, well, not just competent academics, but true ethical leaders and mentors.
Moving right along to Section 4, the Transformational Roadmap. If you're a university leader or a policymaker tuning into this explainer, you're probably wondering how to actually pull off this massive shift. Let's move to the timeline and see how this builds over 4 deliberate stages. Phase 1 is awareness and foundation. This takes about 1 to 2 years, mostly focusing on completely rewriting the university's core mission. Phase 2 moves into development and experimentation over the next 2 to 3 years, testing out these new programs. By Phase 3, which is a 3 to 4 year process, we're mainstreaming those successes across the entire institution. And finally, Phase 4 is a continuous era of global leadership, where the university is actually exporting this balanced model to the rest of the world.
And that brings us to our final section, measuring civilizational impact. Because let's face it, if we are no longer just counting graduation rates, how do we actually measure success? The Faied model demands a totally new, dual approach to evaluation. On the quantitative side, we're looking at hard numbers, the actual output of interdisciplinary research, the number of community projects physically executed, and the global institutional partnerships formed. But then, on the qualitative side, we evaluate the depth of cognitive integration, the genuine ethical adherence of the graduates, and the institution's overall global civilizational influence. The big takeaway here, we need to start tying research funding directly to actual societal impact and essentially establish a brand new academic accreditation standard.
Ultimately, this entire model rests on a really powerful fundamental truth. The quote goes, "Nations are but morals as long as they remain. If their morals depart, they depart." It's profound, right? If a civilization loses its moral core, sovereignty is lost, and knowledge just becomes a cheap, consumed commodity. The university has to be the engine that prevents that from happening.
So, I'll leave you with this one final, provocative question to ponder. If your university were evaluated today, not by the paper degrees it prints out, but by the actual civilization and human character it builds, what would its grade be? Thanks for exploring the Faied model with us today.